Good morning, first graders. I hope you had a great weekend. Hopefully you had a good Mother's Day. We're going to do something kind of different this week. We are going to be reading Flat Stanley. This is one of my favorite books, and if you were in class, we would be reading it, okay? So there are 5 chapters in here, so I'm going to get on here every day, and I'm going to read you a chapter, and I'm going to go through your packet with you. So what I need you to do first is I need you to find your packet wherever you have it, whether you have it in a binder or your parents have it, go and find your packet. And in the back, I want you to unclip the clip, and I want you to carefully, maybe have someone help you, I want you to pull off your Flat Stanley packet. And make sure to put your clip back together if it's still on that ring. Okay, so I need everybody to go and find this if you don't have it in front of you yet. You guys can pause me for a second and go and get this, okay? All right. Once you have it, I want you to first put your name right here. And this is the Flat Stanley Response Journal. This is going to have a lot of fun activities. It's going to check our comprehension from reading, and there's some really fun things in here that you guys get to do. So we're going to flip it over to the first, and this talks about Chapter 1, and Chapter 1 is called The Big Bulletin Board, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read Chapter 1, and when we're done, we're going to answer these questions together and do the activity, okay? So first, something that kind of helps us is if we already know what the questions are that we're looking for. So I'm going to read you the questions, so as I'm reading the chapter book, you guys can have an idea of what you're looking for, okay? All right, the first one says, who is the main character in the book? Now, the main character is who the story is about. What is the family's last name? Who fell on Stanley during the night? What happened to Stanley when it fell on him? Where did Stanley's parents take him? Stanley was how many feet tall? And then on the bottom, we're going to talk about something called a simile. Okay, now that's something we haven't talked about yet, but it is something really cool. A simile is a comparison between two things using the word like or as. So, for example, I could say the sun was like a yellow marble in the sky. So I'm comparing the sun and the marble. So what we're going to do is we are going to compare Stanley. Stanley was as flat as, and we'll get to that part in just a minute. So think of things that are flat as I'm reading, okay? All right, so let's go that far. I'm going to start. It's called Flat Stanley, and it is by Jeff Brown, and there's lots of books on Flat Stanley's of different adventures that he takes, but this is the original one, okay? So here we go. Flat Stanley, his original adventure. Chapter 1, The Big Bulletin Board. Breakfast was ready. I will go wake the boys, Mrs. Lambchop said to her husband, George Lambchop. Just then, their youngest son, Arthur, called from the bedroom. He shared with his brother, Stanley. Hey, come and look. Hey! Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop were both very much in favor of politeness and careful speech. Hay is for horses, Arthur, not people, Mr. Lambchop said as they entered the bedroom. Try to remember that. Excuse me, Arthur said, but look! He pointed to Stanley's bed. Across it lay an enormous bulletin board that Mr. Lambchop had given the boys a Christmas ago so that they could pin up pictures and messages and maps. What does enormous mean? Do you think enormous means big? Do you think it means small? What do you think? Think for a minute. Enormous. An elephant is enormous. If you said something very large or huge, you were right. But Stanley was not hurt. In fact, he would still have been sleeping if he had not been woken by his brother's shout. What's going on here? He called out cheerfully from beneath the enormous board. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop hurried to lift it from the bed. Heavens, said Mrs. Lambchop. Gosh, said Arthur. Stanley's flat. Okay, we've answered a few of our questions. I hope you're remembering them. Okay, so we have Mr. Lambchop. We have Mrs. Lambchop. We have the brother. What's his name? Arthur. And then we have Flat Stanley. Missed a few pages here. Let me get back. Flat Stanley is as flat as a pancake, said Mr. Lambchop. Darned darndest thing I've ever seen. Let's all have breakfast, Mrs. Lambchop said. Then Stanley and I will go see Dr. Dan and hear what he has to say. In his office, Dr. Dan, there he is, examined Stanley all over. How do you feel? He asked. Does it hurt very much? I felt sort of tickly for a while after I got up, Stanley Lambchop said, but I feel fine now. Well, that's mostly how it is with these cases, said Dr. Dan. Well, we'll just have to keep an eye on him. Okay, so we have Dr. Dan, and we've got Stanley, and we have him examining, and he says he feels a little tickly. We'll just have to keep an eye on this young fella, he said when he had finished the examination. Sometimes we doctors, despite all our years of training and experience, can only marvel at how little we really know. Mrs. Lambchop said she thought Stanley's clothes would have to be altered by a tailor now, so Dr. Dan told his nurse to take Stanley's measurements. Mrs. Lambchop wrote them down. Stanley was, I'm going to write this down, he was 4 feet tall, so this is tall. So if this is the floor, and this is Stanley right here. Oh man, that's kind of a small head here. Okay, here's Stanley. He is 4 feet tall, okay? And about a foot wide and a ½ an inch thick. So this way right here, he's a foot. So 1 foot is 12 inches. So we'll just put 1 foot. And then it said he is a ½ an inch thick. So thickness is, they're talking about this part, like the side of you. So if he turned to the side, I don't know how to draw this very good, guys. So if that was the side of him, from here to here, he's only a ½ an inch. So about this thick. And Mrs. Meekum is several inches, right? So that's because he got smashed. All right, so the nurse took his measurements so that his mom can go get him his clothes altered, which means to change them so that they fit him. All right, that is the rest of that chapter. Chapter 2 is called Being Flat. Okay, so now that we've read it, let's go back and let's answer us some questions, okay? Who is the main character in the book? That's an easy one. Just from the title, we can tell who the main character is and what the book's going to be about. So the main character of the book is Flat Stanley. Now, if you need to know how to spell that, I'm going to hold this for a few minutes, or you can turn and you can look at the front. It is a name. It is a title, so we're going to capitalize it, okay? All right, the second question is, what is the family's last name? We read it. We know his mom's name. We know his dad's name. We know his brother's last name. Can you guys think? I wish I was here to hear your answers. If you said this word is actually a, it left my head, a compound word. 2 words that can stand alone, but when you put them together, they make a new word, right? So this word is lamb chop, and that is their last name. If you said that, way to go. All right, the third question is, what fell on Stanley during the night? That's an easy one. Look at what chapter 1 is called, the big bulletin board. So what fell on him? A big bulletin board, right? You can write that. So we have Flat Stanley right on this line. We have lamb chop, and we have the big bulletin board. Now, if I'm going a little too fast, pause me, okay, so that you can get caught up. All right, this next one, not the last one, says, what happened to Stanley when it fell on him? Well, what happened to him? He felt okay, right? He just became what? He became flat. So you can make a sentence out of that. You can say he got flat, he became flat, he got smashed, smashed, and there's not a T at the end. Remember, it's an ED because remember, the ED makes 3 sounds, doesn't it? ed, duh, and tuh. Hope you're still remembering all of these tricks that we learned. All right, the next one is, where did Stanley's parents take him? Did they take him out to eat? Did they take him to the park? Where did they take him? They took him to Dr. Dan's, right? So, doctor, that's an abbreviation, a shortened version of doctor. Dr. Dan's. Dan is going to have ownership of his office. So they took him to Dr. Dan's office. All right. So we're down to the last two. So the main character was Flat Stanley. His last name was Lamb Chop. What fell on him during the night was a big bulletin board. And what happened to Stanley? He became flat. And where did Stanley's parents take him? They took him to Dr. Dan's office. All right. Stanley was about how many feet tall? Okay, so we're not talking about how wide he was or how thick he was. We're talking about how tall. So Mrs. Meekum is over 5 feet tall. My husband's over 6 feet tall. And Stanley is 4 feet tall. Good job, guys. 4 feet. So from his feet all the way to his head, he is 4 feet, about 4 feet. So you can write FT is a shortened version for feet, or you can write out 4 feet. Oh, wait. This is from Blast. How do we spell all? All. How do you spell all? Is it A-L or is it A-L-L? I hope you're remembering. 4 feet tall. Okay, now the last one is something I'm going to let you do on your own. Now remember, a simile is comparing two things using the word like or as. So Stanley was flat as, in the book, it referred to him as flat as a pancake. Did you guys pick up on that when I read it? What is something else that is flat? I asked my girls, they're here with me, and Leighton told me he's flat as a board, like a big bulletin board, or Addie had said flat as a cookie. I want you to think of other things that are flat, and that's what you're going to write right here. Stanley was flat as, and then you guys can tell me. And if you want to text me your answers, I would love that too. All right, you guys, we've done chapter 1. We answered all of the questions. I hope you stayed with me, and remember, you can always pause me and then catch up to where we're at. If you turn the page, there's always questions, and then there's a fun activity on the back. So this says right here, Stanley's, this is just the very next page. Sorry, I don't know if I showed you that. Just the very next page. So this is not chapter 2 yet. This is still chapter 1. It says Stanley's bulletin board had pictures, maps, and messages pinned on it. Draw a picture of what you would put on your bulletin board. And then down here it says, what things did you put on your bulletin board? So Mrs. Meekum, in her house, I have a big, it's not a bulletin board, but it's a big magnetic board. And I have a calendar on it, and I have invitations when we get invitations or things that I have to remember. And I put pictures of my family on it. So on my board, I could draw a calendar. I could draw some pictures. And then maybe I could put reminders and have little things like orthodontist appointment or dentist appointment. And I always like to write on it too, things that I have to remember. So maybe you guys have a bulletin board in your room or a magnet board, or maybe your family has one. So I want you to draw. And if you don't, that's fine. Guess what? You get to use your imagination, and you can put whatever you want on your board. Okay? So you can draw on your board, but then down here you have to do your very best sounding out, and you have to tell me what you put on your board. So maybe you put pictures, maybe you put, what else could we put on our board? What did you say? Oh, Addie just said maybe a drawing that you do. Maybe you like to draw and you can do that, or something that you colored, or maybe a fancy thing that you put your name.
No, you know my old pencil box, you could write like
lots of different things that you color or write, or a calendar. Okay? So Tuesday when I get on, we are going to be doing chapter 2, being flat. So we have a few questions to answer, and then you get to color Flat Stanley. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow. So I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you like doing this. It's something a little different. I really wish I could be doing it in person with you, but since I can't, send me some pictures of what you're doing so that I can see, okay? I'll see you guys tomorrow.